Good morning, NVUU. Welcome to this week's online worship service. I'm Kate Moon. I'm going to be your celebrant for this morning, and because Reverend Lisa Hike is away today, Rainer Hoenicke is going to be doing the service. So first of all, let us center ourselves through some beautiful music. Each week we join UUs all around the world in lighting a flaming chalice, the symbol of our faith. You're invited to light a chalice or a candle at home with these words from Amy Williams Clark. We gather in this time of uncertainty, full of unknowns, as angst closes in upon us. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the darkness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our interconnection. For this moment, this radical moment, we find a certainty within the knowable bonds of love and community. I invite you now into a moment of receptivity and reflection as we share the joys and sorrows of our community. We make sacred the milestones of our lives when we share them with each other. I have here a bowl of water and some stones. If you would like to share your joy or sorrow with everyone here, you can type it into the chat. I will be symbolically placing some stones into the bowl to represent the joys and sorrows that are being shared. If you have a joy or a sorrow that, or just concern that you don't want to go into the details of, you could just type stone or joy or sorrow into the chat, whatever you're comfortable with, and we'll know to hold space with you. And I'm going to place one last stone in the bowl in honor of the joys and sorrows that have not been shared today, but that are still in our hearts.
The Limits of Tyrants by Frederick Douglass. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
Let us now join together in a time of silence until the music brings us out. Today's reading is titled The Task of the Religious Community, written by Reverend Mark Morrison-Reed. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed.
In preparation for this virtual Sunday service and celebration, I dug through some old notes and magazine clippings that I have saved over the years and found an essay by Rebecca Solnit entitled Preaching to the Choir in the November 2017 edition of Harper's Magazine. The essay has even more relevance in 2020 than it did then, not only because it is an election year, but also because of the palpable and profound societal shift generated by the Black Lives Matter movement, catalyzed by George Floyd's murder and Donald Trump's sociopathology. On a more personal level, it also made me all weepy, since its title has the word choir in it. I used to sing with the Napa Valley College Chorale and Sing Napa Valley, now being shut down because of the pandemic. No singing for me right now, except every once in a while at home with my family. Finding that essay also immediately gave me those guilt feelings we often stir up in ourselves when we neglect, postpone, or just don't feel like doing something we wish we could have had the discipline to take care of a long time ago. I have not been ready to figure out how to use Zoom or other web technologies to be part of a virtual choir, as we have had the pleasure of experiencing during our own virtual church services. The one that performed for the Sunday service during the General Assembly this year was particularly impressive. I figured that perhaps sharing parts of Rebecca Solnit's essay with you again might give everyone more hope that new aspirations related to social, racial, economic, and environmental justice will stick and bring about a radical shift toward actions that reflect all of our Unitarian Universalist principles. As John Lewis said not too long ago on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America. And I also have hopes that life will eventually return to normal and we can again preach not only to an active choir but also just sing again in harmony. I'm quoting extensively from the essay with a few of my additions sprinkled in here and there. Rebecca Solnit describes the phrase preaching to the choir as hectoring your listeners with arguments they already agree with. But it can be applied too widely to malign conversation between people whose beliefs happen to coincide. She says the phrase implies that political work should be primarily evangelical, even missionary. That the task is to go out and convert the heathens, that talking to those with whom we agree achieves nothing. But only the most patient and skillful among us can alter the views of those who disagree profoundly. And is there no purpose in getting preached to? In gathering with your compatriots? Why else do we go to church but to sing, to pray a little, to ease our souls, to see our friends, and to hear the sermon? What's more, to suggest that you shouldn't preach to the choir is to misunderstand the nature of preaching. Conversion or the transmission of new information is not the primary aim. The preacher has other work to do. Classically, the sermon is a kind of literary criticism that regards the key sacred texts and their meanings as inexhaustible. Adults, like children, love hearing the great stories more than once. And most religions have prayers and narratives, hymns and songs that are seen as wells of meaning that never run dry. You can always go lay down your sword and shield by the riverside one more time. There are always more ways to explore how nothing evil may cross this door, or ask the Spirit of life to come unto me. Karen Haygood Stokes, a minister in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who formerly belonged to the San Francisco Symphony Choir, explained to me that her aim is not so much to persuade people to believe as it is to encourage them to inquire into existing beliefs. My task as a preacher is to find the places of agreement and then move someplace from there. Not to change anybody's mind, but to deepen an understanding. The common ground among her parishioners is not the destination, it's the starting point. Have we thought critically about why we agree? It's a call to go deeper, to question yourself. The primary assumption behind the idea that we shouldn't preach to the choir is that one's proper audience is one's enemies, not one's allies. This becomes especially true during election season, the prevailing view being that elections are won not by focusing on the base, but by flipping the opposition. By this reasoning, all that I write and say during those cycles should be pitched at my adversaries to recruit them. However, much evidence suggests that political organizations benefit most from motivating those who already agree with you. And that the Democrats in particular find the most success by pursuing people who don't know whether they'll vote rather than how they'll vote. This means reaching constituents who historically have been less likely to go to the poll: the poor, the young, the non-white. Republicans know this, which is why they worked hard to perfect voter suppression tactics that target those populations. Nevertheless, centrist Democrats often go wooing those who don't support them, thereby betraying those who do. It's as though you ditched not only your congregation, but your covenant in the hope of making inroads among believers of some other faith. You think you're recruiting, really you are losing your religion. The question is one of both strategy and principle. Do you win by chasing those who don't share your views, or by serving and respecting those already with you? Is the purpose of the choir to sing to the infidels or inspire the faithful? What happens if the faithful stop showing up, donating, doing the work? One reason we emphasize conversion is that we tend to believe that ideas matter more than actions. And doesn't that ring true especially for Universalists? We tend to think that beliefs directly determine behavior, that a preponderance of agreement will result in social change. In years past, I've often heard people obsess over polls that revealed how many Americans think climate change is real. They seemed convinced that if everyone could be made to believe, the crisis would be solved. But if people who believe climate change is real and pressing do nothing to address the problem, nothing happens. Not only is it unlikely that everyone will agree, it doesn't matter whether they do, and it isn't worth waiting for. There are still people who don't believe that women are endowed with the same inalienable rights as men. And this hasn't prevented us from creating policies that are based on the principle of equality between the sexes. There are still people who don't believe that blacks and brown and indigenous people are endowed with the same inalienable rights as whites. And this hasn't prevented us from creating policies that are based on equal rights. What matters is that some of us act. In 2006, the political scientist Erica Chenoweth set out to determine whether nonviolence was as effective for regime change as violence. She found out, to her surprise, that nonviolent strategies worked better. Organizers were enthralled by her conclusion that only around 3.5% of the population was needed to successfully resist or even topple a regime. In other words, to create change, you don't need everyone to agree with you. You just need some people to agree so passionately that they will donate, campaign, march, risk arrest or injury. The majority of Americans, according to Gallup polls from the early 1960s, did not support the tactics of the civil rights movement, and less than a quarter of the public approved of the 1963 March on Washington. Nevertheless, the march helped push the federal government to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and it was the march that Martin Luther King Jr. It was at the march that Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech, an example of preaching to the choir at its best. King spoke to inspire his supporters rather than persuade his detractors. He disparaged moderation and gradualism. He argued that his listeners' dissatisfaction was legitimate and necessary, but black activists didn't need to wait for them if white allies were needed. Often, it's an example of passionate idealism that converts others. The performance of integrity is more influential than that of compromise. Rather than meet people where they are, you can locate yourself someplace they will eventually want to be. The choir is made up of the deeply committed those who show up every Sunday, listen to every sermon, and contribute like crazy. The time the choristers spend with one another, the sum of their sympathy and shared experience, is part of what helps them sing in unison and in tune. To win politically, you don't need to win over people who differ from you. You need to motivate your own. There are 1,000 things beyond the fact of blunt agreement that you might need or want to discuss with your friends and allies. There are strategy and practical management, the finer points of a theory, values and goals, both incremental and ultimate, reassessment as things change for better or for worse. Effective speech in this model is an alchemy. It doesn't transform what people believe. It's electricity. It galvanizes them to act. In an intellectual exchange, disagreement doesn't mean tearing down a rival, but testing and strengthening the structure of a proposal and analysis. It is what you do when you agree with people in general, but have specifics to work out, and that work can be a joy. It's an agreement in which one is the preacher or the choir, in which everything is open to question, in which ideas are beautiful and precision is holy. Though useful debate about ideas and ethics is happening over social media, much of the time we spend together or in solitude has been replaced by the time we spend online, especially now during the pandemic, in areas that are not conducive to subtlety or complexity. We have shifted to short declarative statements, to thinking in headlines, binaries. Catch-all categories, to viewing words as places in a game of checkers rather than, say, gestures in a ballet. If you're confident that everything not black is white, discussions about shades and hues seem beside the point. This absolutism presumes that our only position on those with whom we don't have complete agreement is complete disapproval, and also that agreement is simple, past which there's no nuance, strategy, possibility to explore. Absolutism is obviously antithetical to political politics, to practical politics, which of course depend on understanding and sometimes work alongside those with whom you may not agree, or with whom you agree on some things and not on others. As I learned in anti-nuclear political gatherings in the 1980s, when downwinder Mormons, punks, pagans, Japanese Buddhist monks, Franciscan priests and nuns, and Western Shoshone elders worked together pretty well. Maybe it's antithetical to the human condition, where we must coexist with differences and make the most of our journeys in increments. To dismiss the value of talking to our own is to fail to see that the utility of conversation, like that of preaching, goes far beyond persuasion or the transmission of information. At its best, conversation is a means of accomplishing many subtle and indirect things. The painter Rudolf Baranek, who died 20 years ago, once told me a story about a ferry ride he took in New York City on a bitter winter day in the late 1930s, soon after he had arrived as a refugee from Eastern Europe. "It is very cold, is it not?" he said in his formal English to a black man standing next to him on the deck. "Yeah, man," his fellow passenger replied. Why is this man singing? Baranek wondered. The moment remained with him. The unfamiliar musicality of the New Yorker's intonation had made memorable what was otherwise an ordinary exchange. Why comment to a stranger about the weather when the conditions are obvious to both of you? Because it's an affirmation that you exist in the same place, that no matter what else might separate you, you have that in common. And because it's an opening, if not to understanding, then at least to the place where it might begin. Karen Stokes told me she thinks of the choir as providing a space that is near the opposite of the combative culture of the internet. She says, in so many churches that I've served, the choir is the primary support group. They meet every week, they hang out together, put in extra time on Sunday, have made a commitment to one another. You can't just drop in and say, let's sing this or I'm leaving. Everyone has submitted themselves to something bigger, to the creation of music, and in a church setting, music for the worship of God. Within most examples at broad consensus, there's a whole host of questions and unresolved differences. Agreement is only the foundation. Yet from here, we can build strong communities of love, spirited movements of resistance. We cannot walk alone, Dr. King said in 1963. Find people to walk with and talk with, and we find power as well as pleasure. May it be so.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This congregation depends entirely upon the generosity of its members and friends. All that we give in time, talent, and treasure is what sustains this community and makes it not just a sanctuary for us to return to for spiritual nourishment, but an oasis from which we can go out into the world carrying the waters of life. You can donate by going to our website at nvuu.org and clicking the donate button, or send a check to us at NVUU, 1625 Salvador Avenue, Napa, California 94558. The offering will now be gratefully received. Thank you for your many gifts. All you do and all that you are vital to building the beloved community in our region and beyond. So now we extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
Blessings on Those Staying Home by Linda Barnes. We're staying home. Love has never asked this of us before. We're staying home. This is our gift to humanity. Let us wish each other well. For those staying home alone, I offer you this blessing. May you grow a deeper understanding of your own worth. Dear one, leave in the aloneness with gentle care, for this too shall pass. May you be blessed with the peace and serenity. May you find the courage to reach out to hear another's voice and to remember others need you too. May you be well. For those staying home together, I offer you this blessing. May you find moments of patience and grace in your relations. May you offer each other enough time apart, reassurance and space enough to cry, to safely rage, for this too shall pass. Then let peace come again into your home. May you see one another's whole self as a gift. May you be well. For those working from home, I offer you this blessing. May you remember to take breaks. May you find the means to relish your imperfection and the imperfection of others as evidence of our shared humanity. You are enough even when there isn't enough. Make order in your days and then let it go. May you be well. For those staying home with children, I offer you this blessing. May you find humor and compassion in your days. There will be learning of a different kind, deeper no doubt, unexpected for sure. May there be patience and forgiveness again and again and again, for this too shall pass. May you all remember the deep love that brought your family into being. May there be peace and understanding in your home. May you be well. May we be well. May be it so. Go in peace.